So in this movie, we're going to start out by just creating a simple canvas element and writing or rendering some text into that canvas element. So I'm just again starting with our boilerplate HTML5 code here, saved to an HTML file on the desktop called demo. And I'm going to come down in the body tag, and I'm actually going to put in my canvas tag. Now I need to give it an ID so that I can reference this from my JavaScript, and I'm just going to give it an ID of canvas. I'm going to give it a width of 800 and a height of 600. And then in between the opening and the closing tags for a canvas element, this is essentially where you can put some alternate content. So let's say that somebody's in a browser that doesn't support Canvas. Anything that's inside of these tags will be rendered. So all I'm going to do is to put in some text that say Canvas is not supported. Okay, so now with that created, now I'm going to come into my init function. And what I need to do first is to get a reference to this canvas. So I'm going to create a variable. I'll just call it can is equal to, and then we're going to use the document.getElementById method. So document.getElementById, and pass in the ID of the element that we want to get, and I gave it an ID of canvas. So now I have a nice reference to that canvas element. But like I mentioned in the last movie, we don't actually draw anything to the canvas using this canvas element reference. What we need to do is to get the drawing context. So I'm going to create another variable here. I'm going to call it CTX for context. And I'm going to say can.getContext. And to this method, I pass in which drawing context do I want to get. So there's actually two that are available. So the first is the 2D context, which is what we're going to be working with in this chapter. Now there is another context which is 3D, and that's essentially using WebGL, which we'll look at later in the course. So now with this line of code, I now have my context variable, and it's with that context variable with which I do all of the drawing and the manipulating of the canvas. So what I'm going to first do is to set a property on the context, which is going to say what font do I want to use when I'm actually rendering text into my canvas. So I'm going to say ctx.font, and here I actually pass in a string which tells which font do I want to use. I'm going to pass in 20 pixels for the size, and I'm just going to use Arial as the font. So now I've set that font property on my context. Now I can actually render some text inside of my canvas. And to do that, we use the fillText method of the context. So ctx.fillText. And to this, we pass in three parameters. First, what string do we want to render? Well, I'm going to render hello world. And then the next is what the X and the Y position is of where I want to place this text within the canvas. And remember, the canvas is 800 by 600. So I'm just going to put it at an X of 50 and a Y of 50. Okay, so I'm going to save it now and go over to Chrome and refresh it. And now you can see I have my text rendered. You'll notice you can't select this text because, again, what it's done behind the scenes is it's taken the text and actually rendered it as pixels to the canvas element. So if we come back here, now you can see essentially what the basic makeup is for any canvas application. We're going to define our canvas down in the HTML, and then we essentially need to get the drawing context. In this case, we're getting the 2D context. And with that context object, that's the object that we're going to work with to manipulate and render things to the canvas element.